Have you ever felt truly invisible? Not just overlooked in a crowd but transparent. As if the world looks right through you, seeing only the uniform you wear, the role you play, the label they've assigned you, and missing the person burning with ideas and dreams inside. Have you ever wondered what might happen if just one person, the right person, finally saw you? Alara knew that feeling intimately. It was a cold, heavy cloak she wore every single day, draped over the grease-stained jumpsuit that served as her uniform. She existed in the colossal, echoing expanse of the Ares Aerospace hangar, a ghost haunting the periphery of innovation. Her official title was Junior Maintenance Technician, a glorified term for the person who cleaned tools, swept metal shavings, and wiped down the fuselages of billion-dollar aircraft she would never be allowed to work on. To the engineers in their crisp lab coats and the executives in their tailored suits, she was just part of the background, a necessary but unremarkable fixture, as inanimate as the tool chests she so meticulously organized. Her hands, perpetually stained with hydraulic fluid and grime, moved with a grace and precision that belied her station. She didn't just clean a wrench, she balanced it, felt its heft, her fingers tracing the maker's mark, her mind cataloging its tolerances. Her world was one of tactile reality, of cold steel, the smell of ozone, and the deep, resonant hum of powerful machines at rest. This world was a sanctuary and a prison. It was here, amidst the titans of modern flight, that she felt closest to her father, and furthest from her dream. One blustery Tuesday afternoon, the hangar was electric with a nervous energy that had nothing to do with the high-voltage systems powering the facility. Richard, her stepfather and the facility's mid-level program director, strode through the hangar, his polished shoes clicking an arrogant rhythm on the sealed concrete floor. He was a man assembled from corporate buzzwords and cheap cologne, his ambition a flimsy shield for his profound insecurity. He spotted Alara by the landing gear of the new X-117 prototype, carefully wiping away a smudge of leaked lubricant. A sneer, practiced and cruel, curled his lip. Still playing with wrenches, Alara, he called out, his voice loud enough for the nearby engineers to hear. Some of us have real work to do today. Try to look busy, at least. He didn't wait for a reply. He never did. He just wanted to plant the barb and walk away, leaving her to bleed. His words were a constant reminder of her place in his world. After her father, the brilliant but erratic aerospace engineer Marcus Thorne, had died, her mother had married Richard. Richard saw Marcus not as a visionary, but as a failure, a man whose radical ideas got him ostracized from the very company that now profited from diluted versions of his theories. In Alara, Richard saw the same dangerous, unmanageable spark. He had offered her a place at the company, not out of kindness, but as a form of control, a way to keep her under his thumb, safely tucked away in the lowest possible role. He called it an opportunity, but they both knew it was a cage. Today, his usual condescension was sharpened by anxiety. The source of that anxiety was printed on a laminated itinerary he clutched in his hand. Visit from General Alistair Madsen. Madsen wasn't just any general. He was a living legend, a six-star anomaly whose opinion could greenlight a $10 billion program, or condemn it to the scrapyard with a single, quiet word. Impressing him was Richard's entire world today. As he continued his preemptive strike on dust bunnies and misplaced clipboards, Alara finished her task, her jaw tight. She watched him go, a small, insignificant figure in the shadow of a giant metal bird. But Richard was wrong. She wasn't just playing with wrenches. And her real work was something he couldn't possibly comprehend. Later that night, long after the last shift had clocked out, and the hangar had fallen into a deep, cavernous silence, Alara returned. The colossal main lights were off, casting the fleet of futuristic aircraft in monolithic darkness. But in a forgotten corner, behind a stack of obsolete shipping containers and shielded by a heavy, grease-stained canvas tarp, a single work lamp cast a pool of warm, defiant light. This was her true workshop. Her real life. She slipped behind the tarp, and the world changed. There, resting on a custom-built cradle of welded scrap, was her secret. It was a drone, but to call it a drone was like calling a supernova a firefly. She called it the Phoenix. It was sleek, predatory, and utterly unique. Its design was a radical departure from the brutish, angular machines that filled the rest of the hangar. It was a symphony of biomimicry and advanced aerodynamics, its lines stolen from the iridescent fury of a dragonfly, its composite wings layered like the feathers of a falcon. It was built not from a limitless budget but from ingenuity and desperation. The fuselage was shaped from a rejected carbon fiber panel she'd rescued from the scrap heap. The actuators were salvaged from a decommissioned targeting pod. The wiring, however, was pristine, bundled with a level of obsessive care that bordered on artistry. This was more than a machine, it was a testament. It was the culmination of her father's legacy and her own fierce, hidden genius. A ghost of a memory flickered in her mind, her father, Marcus, his hands dusty with chalk, sketching complex equations on the garage floor. He wasn't drawing planes, he was explaining the poetry of airflow, the way a bird's wing could flex and warp to taste the wind. They build bricks and strap rockets to them, he'd told her, his eyes blazing with a frustrated passion. They've forgotten how to dance with the sky, Ellie. They've forgotten the magic. He had been pushed out, his research on bioadaptive control surfaces deemed too expensive, too unconventional. The corporate machine had no room for poets. He died a few years later, his spirit eroded by bitterness and regret, leaving behind stacks of notebooks filled with revolutionary ideas. Those notebooks were her Bible. The Phoenix was her sermon. Here, in the quiet hum of her makeshift lab, the timid, invisible maintenance girl vanished. Her shoulders, usually hunched to make herself smaller, straightened. Her eyes, often downcast, now held a sharp, analytical focus. She moved with a purpose that was entirely her own, her grimy hands connecting a diagnostic laptop to the drone's central processor. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, a language she understood as fluently as speech. This machine was her father's vindication, and her own declaration of existence. She worked for hours, losing herself in the intricate dance of engineering and creation, the only sounds the soft click of her keyboard, and the distant groan of the old hangar settling in the cold night air. She was creating a future that her stepfather, in his wildest, most arrogant dreams, could never even imagine. The next morning, the hangar was transformed. The quiet sanctuary of the night was gone, replaced by a frantic, orchestrated buzz. The concrete floors were polished to a mirror shine, and every surface gleamed under the full, brilliant glare of the overhead lights. Engineers who usually shuffled around in worn-out polo shirts were now clad in crisp, company-branded jackets. Richard was at the epicenter of this storm of activity, a whirlwind of nervous energy and shouted commands. He adjusted his tie for the 10th time, his face a mask of strained confidence. He was a man preparing for the performance of his life. The arrival of General Madsen was an exercise in anticlimax. A simple black sedan pulled up to the main hangar door, and from it emerged not a towering, decorated military icon, but a surprisingly compact, elderly man. General Alistair Madsen was stooped with age, his uniform immaculate but worn, his face a roadmap of 1,000 difficult decisions. But his eyes, a pale, piercing blue, were anything but old. They were sharp, analytical, and missed nothing. They radiated an aura of immense, unshakable authority that had nothing to do with the 6 stars on his collar. Richard practically sprinted to greet him, his hand outstretched, a too-wide smile plastered on his face. General Madsen. An absolute honor to have you. Richard Price, Program Director. We have an incredible day planned for you. Madsen gave his hand a brief, firm shake, his expression unreadable. Just show me what you're building, Mr. Price. Spare me the sales pitch. Richard's smile tightened, but he quickly recovered, launching into his meticulously rehearsed tour. He led the general and his small entourage of aides towards the company's crown jewel, the X-117 Reaper, a next-generation fighter jet that was as much a political statement as it was an aircraft. Richard waxed lyrical about its stealth capabilities, its weapon payload, its groundbreaking radar system, spouting acronyms and budget figures like a priest reciting scripture. Madsen walked slowly around the colossal machine, his hand occasionally tracing a seam in the fuselage. He remained silent, his lack of reaction more unnerving than any criticism. He stopped near the engine exhaust, his gaze fixed on the complex vectoring nozzle. "What's your solution for the plume's thermal signature at high altitude?" he asked, his voice quiet. The question hung in the air. Richard looked blankly at his lead engineer, a man named Henderson, who began to stammer about new ceramic composites and cooling algorithms. It was a textbook answer, evasive and full of jargon. The general's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't interested in textbook answers. He knew the problem hadn't been solved. He had just exposed the polished surface of the project to reveal the rot underneath. Richard, sensing his carefully constructed presentation was beginning to crumble, quickly tried to change the subject. "And over here, sir, we have the new Ares drone platform, a marvel of autonomous warfare." As he gestured, his eyes scanned the hangar, looking for a distraction. And then he saw her. Ilara. She was standing near the far wall, tasked with the menial but necessary job of checking the pressure on a nitrogen cart. She was trying to stay out of the way, to be invisible. A cruel, opportunistic thought sparked in Richard's mind. He saw a chance to reassert his authority, to create a moment of levity, and to put his troublesome stepdaughter firmly in her place, all in one go. He smiled. It was a predator's smile. "General," Richard announced, his voice booming with false bonhomie as he deliberately steered the group away from the multi-million-dollar displays. "Before we continue, I want to introduce you to a key member of our team. It's important to remember that our success isn't just about the top brass and the lead engineers. It's about everyone, down to the most hands-on level." He beckoned with a grand, patronizing gesture. "Ilara. Come over here for a moment." Every head turned. Ilara froze, the pressure gauge slipping from her fingers. 100 pairs of eyes, executives, engineers, and the piercing blue eyes of the general himself, were suddenly fixed on her. The blood rushed to her face, a hot tide of humiliation. She felt her greasy jumpsuit cling to her, her stained hands suddenly feeling clumsy and alien. She wanted the concrete floor to swallow her whole. Slowly, she walked towards them, each step an eternity. She felt like a specimen being brought for inspection. Richard placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look inclusive but felt like a shackle. "General Madsen, this is Ilara," he said, drawing out her name. "She's part of our maintenance crew. A real salt-of-the-earth type. Keeps the place running." The condescension dripped from every word. He was presenting her like a quaint artifact, a piece of the factory's rustic charm. The executives around him offered tight, polite smiles. They understood the game. This was Richard demonstrating his folksy, man-of-the-people leadership style, while simultaneously reminding everyone of the rigid hierarchy. But Richard wasn't done. He was enjoying this far too much. "But Ilara here has ambitions," he continued, a sly twinkle in his eye. "She has her own little projects. Fancies herself a bit of a designer, you know. Like her father." The mention of her father was a deliberate twist of the knife, a public reminder of Marcus Thorne's fall from grace. "Why don't you tell the general about your little toy airplane, Ilara?" He gestured vaguely towards the forgotten corner of the hangar, a dismissive flick of the wrist. "The one you build from scraps." His smirk was wide and triumphant. He expected her to stammer, to shrink, to mumble something incoherent and flee. He was using her as the punchline to a joke only he found funny, a joke designed to reinforce his own superiority. The moment stretched into an agonizing silence. Ilara stood there, trapped in the spotlight of their collective gaze, the echo of their soft, sycophantic chuckles ringing in her ears. Her entire life, she had been told she was small, that her ideas were worthless, that her place was in the shadows. And now, the man who was supposed to be her family was publicly crucifying her with that very message in front of the most powerful man she had ever seen. She tightened her jaw, her nails digging into her palms. A fire, long dormant, began to smolder in the pit of her stomach. She would not give him the satisfaction of her tears. But General Madsen did not laugh. He did not smile. His face remained a mask of calm neutrality, but his pale eyes had sharpened, moving from Richard's smug, expectant face to Ilara's. He saw the flicker of defiance in her posture, the rigid set of her jaw. He had spent a lifetime reading people in high-stakes situations, and he saw no embarrassment in her eyes. He saw fire. He saw a story. A project. The general's voice was unexpectedly soft, yet it cut through the lingering whispers and silenced the entire hangar. I find that personal projects are often the birthplace of true innovation. They are born from passion, not from committee meetings and budget forecasts. Richard's smirk faltered, twitching at the corners. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. The general was supposed to chuckle, clap him on the back and move on. He wasn't supposed to take the bait. "Oh, it's really nothing, sir," Richard said quickly, trying to wave it away. "Just a hobby to pass the time. As I said, scrap parts and a little imagination. We really should be getting to the F-300 simulation." He tried to steer the general physically, a hand on his elbow, but Madsen stood firm, rooted to the spot. He ignored Richard as if he were a buzzing fly. His gaze was locked on Elara, and for the first time, she felt like someone was actually seeing her, not the jumpsuit, not her father's ghost, but her. "Show me," the general said. It was two simple words, but they held the weight of an executive order. It was not a question. It was not a polite request. It was a command, delivered with the quiet, absolute authority of a man who was accustomed to his will becoming reality. The air in the hangar crackled with tension. The executives exchanged nervous glances. Richard's face, which had been flushed with arrogant pleasure, was now beginning to pale. He had lost control of the narrative, his clever little joke backfiring spectacularly. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The moment she had dreamed of and dreaded in equal measure. All her secret work, all her hopes, all the whispered conversations with her father's memory, were about to be dragged into the harsh, unforgiving light. She could refuse. She could mumble an apology, say it wasn't ready, and let the moment pass. She could retreat back into the comfortable misery of her invisibility. She looked at Richard's face, now a mask of barely concealed panic, and a surge of courage, cold and clear, washed over her. He had meant to humiliate her. Instead, he had given her an opening. She met General Madsen's steady, inquisitive gaze, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt her own power. She took a deep, shuddering breath and gave a single, firm nod. Without a word, she turned and began walking towards the tarp. A profound and curious hush fell over the assembled group. The confident swagger of the executives evaporated, replaced by a confused, shuffling uncertainty as they followed the young woman in the grease-stained jumpsuit. She led them away from the polished, perfectly lit displays of corporate might, towards the dark, dusty corner of the hangar that everyone ignored. Richard, scrambling to salvage the situation, hurried to the general's side. "Sir, I really must insist," he hissed, his voice a low, desperate whisper. "This is highly unorthodox. We have a schedule. The F-300 simulation is a billion-dollar tactical system. It's far more worthy of your valuable time than a girl's hobby." General Madsen didn't even turn his head. He simply raised a single, gloved hand, a gesture that instantly silenced Richard's frantic protest. The message was clear: I am in command here. His focus remained entirely on the small figure ahead of them. Elara reached the heavy canvas tarp. Her hands, which could disassemble and reassemble a complex gearbox with flawless precision, trembled slightly as she gripped the rough fabric. This was more than pulling back a curtain. It was peeling back her own skin, exposing her very soul to the world. She took one last, steadying breath and pulled. The heavy tarp slid away with a soft, gritty rasp, revealing the secret it had guarded for so long. The Phoenix sat on its makeshift stand, bathed in the solitary glow of the single work lamp she had left on. It was raw. It was unfinished. Patches of its carbon fiber skin were unpainted, the intricate weaving of the composite material visible. Bundles of wiring, though meticulously organized and secured, were exposed along its spine. It did not have the sterile, mass-produced perfection of the other aircraft in the hangar. It had something more. It had a soul. Its design was breathtaking, a thing of savage elegance. Compared to the brutish functionality of the X-117, the Phoenix was a poem written in steel and composites. The executives, who saw the world through the lens of spreadsheets and profit margins, murmured amongst themselves. They saw scrap. They saw a delusional fantasy, a pile of junk cobbled together. Richard let out a short, sharp scoff, a sound of derisive relief. "See, General," he said, his confidence returning. "Like I said. A toy." But General Alistair Madsen was not looking at the unfinished paint or the exposed wiring. He was a pilot, an engineer, and a strategist. He saw beyond the surface. He saw the impossible geometry of the compound angle wings, designed for both high-speed stability and low-speed agility. He saw the series of small, almost invisible vents along the leading edges, a biomimetic boundary layer control system he had only ever seen in theoretical papers. He saw the dual, counter-rotating shrouded rotors of a propulsion system that promised near-silent operation. He saw genius. He began to walk, slowly, circling the Phoenix. His aide stood back, recognizing the look of intense, almost reverent concentration on his face. He was no longer a general inspecting a facility. He was a master craftsman examining the work of a prodigy. The general completed his slow, silent circuit of the Phoenix and came to a stop directly in front of Alara. He looked from the aircraft to her, and back again, a dawning understanding in his piercing blue eyes. The dismissive atmosphere created by Richard had completely evaporated, replaced by a heavy, palpable tension. Madsen's interrogation began, but it was not the condescending questioning of a superior. It was the rapid-fire, peer-to-peer exchange of two brilliant engineering minds. "The power-to-weight ratio," he stated, his voice sharp and direct. "Given the apparent density of the composite and the size of the power cell housing, it seems impossible." "It is," Alara replied, her voice shaky at first, but gaining strength with every word. "I'm not using a conventional lithium-ion cell. It's a prototype solid-state graphene capacitor array. The energy density is nearly 4 times higher. The plans were in my father's." In his old research, the general nodded, absorbing the information. He pointed to a delicate-looking strut on the wing. "These biomimetic control surfaces. At transonic speeds, they'd create harmonic resonance. They'd tear themselves apart." "They would," Alara agreed, a spark of excitement in her eyes as she finally got to speak her own language. "But do you see the microfilaments embedded in the composite? They're piezoelectric. They actively sense resonance frequencies and generate a counterfrequency, damping the vibration in real time. It's an active structural integrity system." One of the general's aides, a decorated colonel with an engineering PhD, from MIT, blinked in astonishment. He began scribbling furiously in a notebook. Richard and his team of executives stood by, their faces a mixture of confusion and growing horror. They might as well have been listening to an alien language. The technical brilliance flying back and forth was so far beyond their comprehension that they were rendered utterly irrelevant, bystanders at a conversation that was reshaping their world. Madsen ran a gloved finger along the engine intake. "This manifold. It's a variable Venturi design, but there are no moving parts." "How?" "Acoustic compression," Alara said simply. "A series of sonic emitters inside the cowling create standing waves of pressure, shaping the airflow before it ever reaches the turbine. It's more efficient and has no mechanical points of failure." The general stood back, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated delight. He looked at Alara with a newfound respect that bordered on awe. He saw not just a gifted engineer, but a true visionary, just like her father had been. He turned to his stunned aide. "Get Dr. Aris from DARPA on a secure line. Right now." He turned back to the drone, then to Alara. "Tell him," the general said, his voice filled with a quiet, triumphant energy, "tell him I've found it." Richard could feel the situation, his career, his entire sense of self-importance, slipping through his fingers like fine sand. Panic set in, cold and sharp. He had to regain control. He had to discredit her, to tear this fantasy down before it completely destroyed him. He stepped forward, his voice loud and strained, a desperate attempt to reclaim the authority that had been so thoroughly stripped from him. "General, I must apologize for this ridiculous sideshow," he boomed, trying to project a command he no longer felt. "This is a complete and utter waste of your valuable time. This young woman," he said, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at Alara, "is not a certified engineer. She has no credentials. This thing," he gestured at the Phoenix with disgust, "has never been flight tested, never been through a single safety protocol. For all we know, it's a pile of junk that will explode if you try to power it on. It is a safety hazard." Alara flinched as if struck. The accusation hit its mark. She had built this in secret. She had borrowed company resources, stayed after hours, bent 1,000 rules. In Richard's world of regulations and protocol, she was guilty. He pressed his advantage, his voice rising in pitch. "Furthermore, she has absolutely no authority to be building personal projects on company property, using company materials. This is a serious breach of conduct." He looked around at his fellow executives, pleading for their support, but they avoided his gaze, their faces pale. They knew, as he was just beginning to realize, that the game had changed. The rules he was citing no longer mattered. General Alistair Madsen turned to face Richard. He moved slowly, deliberately, and the quiet, scholarly demeanor he had worn during his conversation with Alara was gone. It was replaced by a chilling, Arctic cold. The full, immense weight of his 6 stars seemed to press down on the very air in the hangar. His voice, when he finally spoke, was dangerously low, a quiet rumble that promised devastation. "A waste of my time, Mr. Price," he repeated, letting the words hang in the dead silent air. The general's gaze shifted, moving past Richard to the gleaming, billion-dollar X-117 Reaper, the jet Richard had presented with such pride only minutes earlier. "That aircraft over there," Madsen said, his voice now ringing with cold, hard clarity, "is 5 years behind schedule, $1 billion over budget, and its core avionics are already obsolete. It is a monument to compromise, a product of endless committee meetings where every good idea was watered down until it was palatable to everyone and inspiring to no one. It's a flying dinosaur." He turned his gaze back to Richard, and the contempt in his eyes was absolute. Then, he looked at the Phoenix, his expression softening. He reached out and placed a hand on its sleek fuselage, a gesture that was almost a benediction. He looked directly into Richard's terrified eyes, and with the calm, brutal precision of a master swordsman, he delivered the final, career-ending blow. "You stood here, in front of me and your entire team, and you mocked this young woman. You tried to use her for a cheap laugh. You tried to humiliate her." He paused, letting the weight of the indictment settle over the silent crowd. "This isn't her little toy, Mr. Price. This isn't a hobby." The general's voice rose, filled with a power that echoed through the cavernous space. "This is her aircraft. And you are looking at the future of our entire air fleet." The silence that followed the general's proclamation was absolute, so profound that the distant hum of the hangar's ventilation system sounded like a roar. Richard's face, which had cycled through smugness, confusion, and panic, was now a slack, ashen mask of utter devastation. The world he had so carefully constructed, built on a foundation of bravado and bullying, had just been demolished by a few quiet words. His career wasn't just over, it was annihilated. He had publicly ridiculed the very project the military's most powerful general had just declared the future. There was no coming back from that. General Madsen didn't give him a second glance. Richard had ceased to exist for him. He turned his full, undivided attention back to Alara, his expression now warm and paternal. "Your father, Marcus Thorne," he said gently, "was a brilliant man. A true visionary. I read some of his early papers on biomimetic flight. We weren't ready for him then. The technology, the politics. The vision wasn't there." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, sincere respect. "But the world is ready for you, Alara." He gestured expansively at the hangar. "I am officially shutting down all funding for the X-117 Reaper program, and the Ares drone project, effective immediately. Their budgets, their resources, their personnel are now at your disposal. Alara's knees felt weak. She stared at him, speechless, as tears welled in her eyes, tears not of humiliation, but of overwhelming, unbelievable validation. Everything she had worked for, everything she and her father had dreamed of in their garage workshop, was coming true in a dizzying, impossible rush. You will have your own research and development division, the general continued, his voice resonating with purpose. Your own lab, your own team, you will handpick every member. You will have everything you need to make the Phoenix fly. And you will report to me. Directly to me, and only to me. No more committees. No more middlemen. Just innovation. The general's aide, his phone pressed to his ear, hurried over. Sir, Dr. Ares is on the line. Well, sir, he's very excited. He wants to know the project's designation. Madsen smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile that momentarily erased the years from his face. He looked at Alara, then at her creation. Tell him the Phoenix has risen, he said. As the general and his team of astonished aides began to surround Alara, a protective and excited circle, pulling out tablets and immediately beginning to discuss logistics and timelines, Richard was left standing alone in the middle of the vast concrete floor. The other executives, his so-called colleagues, now actively avoided his gaze, shuffling away as if he were contagious. In the space of an hour, he had gone from the center of power to a pariah. He was now the invisible one, the ghost in the hangar. He stared at his stepdaughter, no longer a grease-stained nobody, but the newly crowned queen of aerospace innovation, and the architect of his spectacular downfall. With a shuddering breath, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat, Richard Price turned and walked away, a man completely and irrevocably broken by the weight of his own arrogance and cruelty. Months melted into a blur of frantic, exhilarating work. The dusty, forgotten corner of the hangar was gone. In its place stood a state-of-the-art, glass-walled laboratory, buzzing with the energy of the brightest minds in the industry, all handpicked by Alara. She now wore a lead engineer's lab coat over her jumpsuit, a symbol of her new role, but the familiar grease stains were often still on her hands. She was a leader, but she was still a builder at heart. She stood beside General Madsen in the darkened control room, a massive holographic display before them painting the sky in crisp, digital clarity. On the screen, the Phoenix, now a fleet of 3 sleek, perfected prototypes, performed a series of flawless aerial maneuvers that seemed to defy the known laws of physics. They banked without losing altitude, hovered in complete silence, and accelerated from a dead stop to supersonic speed in a matter of seconds. It was a dance, just as her father had always said it should be. She was no longer the timid, hunched figure who tried to blend into the shadows. Her posture was confident, her voice clear and decisive as she gave commands to her team. The fire that Richard had tried so desperately to extinguish now burned brightly in her eyes, a beacon of purpose and passion. She was respected, not because of a title bestowed upon her, but because of the genius she demonstrated every single day. She had earned her place at the head of the table. The general, who visited weekly, watched the display with a deep, satisfied pride. He put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Potential is a funny thing, he mused, his voice filled with a quiet warmth. It's everywhere. In the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones people dismiss. You just have to be willing to look past the uniform, past the job title, and take the time to see the person inside. Alara turned to him, a genuine, heartfelt smile illuminating her face. The weight of years of insecurity and doubt had finally lifted. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. For seeing me. The final shot on the screen showed a lone phoenix ascending vertically into the stratosphere, leaving the blue sky behind as it raced towards the stars, a symbol of a dream finally, gloriously, taking flight. So let me ask you again. Have you ever felt invisible? The story of Alara and the Phoenix isn't just about a revolutionary aircraft. It is a powerful, undeniable reminder that greatness doesn't always come in the package we expect. It doesn't always wear a tailored suit or speak with practiced confidence. Sometimes, true, world-changing genius wears a greasy jumpsuit, and has dirt under its fingernails. It hides in plain sight, waiting, hoping, for just one person to have the wisdom to look closer. Who are you overlooking in your own life? The quiet janitor who hums complex classical melodies while he works. The checkout girl who sketches incredible designs on the back of receipts during her break. The apprentice who asks too many questions. Their hidden genius could change your world, or the entire world, if only you gave them a chance to be seen. Share this story if you believe in the limitless power of hidden potential. And in the comments below, tell us about a time someone saw the best in you when no one else did, or when you saw it in someone else. Let's create a chain of recognition and remind each other that every single person deserves the chance to show the world who they truly are.